Hey everybody, this is Mike Annuzzi over at musicaccelerator.com, and today what we're going to do is discuss the two different methods that I use in my productions when I'm trying to line up instruments to the grid. So let's talk about Elastic Audio and Beat Detective. So the first method that we're going to look at is Elastic Audio. And with this, I just want to show you the waveforms. Every time there's an attack on an instrument, there is a boost in the waveform, and you can see the attack and decay. We want to make sure that these attacks get as close to the grid line as possible when we're recording and lining up different tracks, especially with multi-mic'd instruments. And one of the methods that we use to start off with is the good old click track, and we lock it in to the sound of the click, and we have the beat per minute, the tempo that we mark the song with, and everything like that. But it is often very difficult just by ear, even if you're a pro musician, to lock in these waveforms. We see over and over, sometimes we push and sometimes we pull. It's very natural to do that. So let's dive a little bit deeper into Elastic Audio. And the first thing that we want to do when we're looking at Elastic Audio is we need to set the Elastic Audio to Rhythmic, okay? I have already grouped this drum track to an Elastic Audio group just for the sake of this example. So it's going to turn on across that entire group, which is actually a simple step, makes it easy. It takes a moment to analyze and process this information in Pro Tools, but as you can see, I only have a quick audio clip, so it did it pretty quickly actually. And we're gonna look at how it's analyzed everything. So just quickly, we see all these little lines. Those go on to the attack of the waveform. That's where Pro Tools thinks that we are trying to hit. Now, we want to make sure that all of these are lined up to the grid, and as you can see, some, like I said earlier, push and some pull. So let's see how we can lock that in. What I like to do at this point is I like to go through the audio and find out where all these breakpoints should be. Just manually looking at it and seeing where the big hits are, using those hits to add the warp markers. So I'm going to go ahead and go through my audio and do that. I'll be right back. Also worth mentioning while I'm doing this is that a lot of times people think that it's a simple 1-2 click. Well, I like to tell people in my sessions that for every hour or for every minute of music, there's an hour worth of editing per instrument. So if there's a drum track, it takes me about an hour to edit. If there's a bass track, it takes me about an hour to edit, and so on and so forth per minute of the song. We got a 5-minute song, that's 5 hours of editing drums. So just keep that in mind as you're going through these processes. See, I've gone through the audio and I have set my warp markers to the places that I think are most relevant in the song. And then what we do is I like to stay in grid mode because because when I am moving things, I like to lock it in with the grid. And you could see that line right there. We're going to take this waveform and watch. Boom. It locked in straight to the grid. So that's all I'm going to do throughout the song. I'm going to look a little bit closer, dive a little bit deeper into it, make sure that I'm locking it to the correct line and to the correct grid line. So I'm going to go do that, and I will be right back. And as you can see at this point, I've gone through this project, and I have done my best to lock in all the waveforms to the grid, just making sure everything lined up the way that I thought it should. It doesn't have to be perfect. That's one of the major things that I want to make clear, that music is not, it doesn't sound better when it's locked in 100%. Sometimes that raw human feel makes it sound more real, and we want that. We don't want it to sound like a computer. So what I'm going to do now is just play back the audio, record it to another track so we get an idea of what we have captured. After listening back to that recording a couple times, I noticed that the more I distorted or the more I warped all these waveforms, the more artifacts were left, and I could hear kind of in the cymbals a lot, just kind of a wishy-washy sound that didn't sound real. So that is my one major concern about using elastic audio with drum tracks. Now, we don't have to go through all those steps that I did where I added the warp markers. Sometimes what I like to do is just go into event and event operations and click quantize and do it that way. And sometimes it's a really, really fast and easy fix. But again, you're going to hear what the computer analyzed and warped on its own with that. And you're going to hear some of those leftover artifacts. Beat Detective, there's a couple different methods that I use. One is the sort of manual method, and the other is letting Beat Detective do the work. So let's dive deeper. Now, the cool thing about Beat Detective is what it does is it takes the waveforms. We have to find where the attack starts, and it will cut the approaching wave into it. So what I like to do if I'm doing it manually is I like to make sure, first of all, we have to make sure that tab to transient is on. And all we do is push the tab button as we lead up to a transient. And then we could hit the hotkey, just B, or we can do our command E to break that region and delete it. Now we have a clean cut to the start of that waveform, and we can manipulate that way. So that is what I like to do manually, just chop and kind of delete. So we have a fresh start to the waveform, tab to transient, break, tab to transient, break, and go through the project like that. So just very quickly, one thing about using Beat Detective is we're not using any of our CPU with elastic audio on. That takes a lot of processing power. So Beat Detective is actually just chopping up the waveforms that we have. So if we go to Event and scroll down to Beat Detective, we have a new window that pops up. And basically what we're doing, without diving in too deep into what Beat Detective is breaking up, we have to make sure that we capture a selection. It analyzes all the waveforms where it thinks that we should separate them. We can separate, and then we can form. Now, this is the step that I have a lot of issues with. Just as long as we are making sure that we capture the selection and the right region is being captured and conformed. Sometimes it warps our audio. We see this problem come up a lot where it wants to move the audio. So let's take a look real quick. If we hit conform, when it says, do you want to proceed, our audio gets moved. If we listen back, we hear all kinds of crazy things happening. Now, it's pretty cool just having it unconformed so we can manipulate it manually from that point on. So all of it is already separated by what Pro Tools thinks we should have. And this is why I always tell clients it takes longer than just a simple click of the button. Since we have that, we look back at all the waveform breaks that were made in Pro Tools. I like to just kind of eyeball everything and line everything up just by guessing the first time through. Any of the major hits, I try and make sure that those lock into the grid as close as possible. I'm going to go through that real quick and then I'll come back. So this just took a couple of minutes of work, and it was pretty easy. All you have to do is chop up the audio, and as you can see, we have a lot of chopped up audio. So we want to make sure now at this point that we can link all this audio together. So we want to add crossfades and and make it sound really smooth. So at this point, if the region conform button didn't work for me and I had to go through manually, which is actually pretty easy to do, it's a lot more time consuming than just one click. But I like to go back, make sure I capture the selection that I had. I edit my smoothing. I like to add a little bit of crossfade length, probably about 5 milliseconds in my smoothing. So when I click, all of these regions that were just chopped up now are going to be linked back together, and you're going to have to listen through a couple times just to make sure that none of the crossfades crossed over, or any of the cuts in the audio added some of the lingering old audio. See, sometimes it doesn't always process every little piece, in which case you can go back and do it manually. It's pretty easy and quick. Doesn't have to be perfect, okay? So we're going to go ahead and play back and record all of this audio into a stereo track just to hear it, get a comparison between the two. So the final thing I want to do is just play back both the elastic audio processing that we did and the beat detective processing that we did more manually, so you can get an idea of how much time you have to allocate to each track, which one is going to work better for you. Can you hide any of this underneath that nobody else is going to hear other than you as the producer, as the editor, as the sound engineer? So let's just listen back to the elastic audio in 3, 2, 1. We're gonna switch over and listen to the beat detective audio. I would always use Beat Detective if I have the time, if I have the finances. I can hear a difference in the quality of the sound that comes out of Beat Detective, and I know that you can hear it too. I really appreciate you all tuning in. This is Mike Annuzzi from musicaccelerator.com. Looking forward to seeing you again soon.